So, in this last talk, I hope to draw together what we've been considering in investigating the Scripture of Great Wisdom, the Heart Sutra, and what we have learnt from practicing deepest wisdom as best we can. Have we learnt and put it into practice in our daily lives? Have we learned to cut through the roots of our selfish greed, ignorance and anger? For me, Zazen is the bedrock of practice, or to put it another way, the pillar of our practice. We present ourselves with the totality of all of life, our life and the life of everything in the universe. We all can do this when we see forms and hear sounds fully engaging body and mind. As Master Jiu wrote in the Serene Reflection Meditation booklet, which is in our bookshop downstairs, man is body and mind, and the purpose of body and mind is the harmonization of body and mind. So Zen is formless and invites us to jump in at the deep end. To do that, we learn to fully occupy our bodies and minds. I've been stressing in these talks how we each in our own individual way need to find out how to practice in our own individual ways. We're all very different, and we all have to discover what we need to do. Let the meditation show you. If you trust Zazen and do not use it as a means of gaining anything, it will reveal to you the response needed to delve into your deepest questions as they arise in the moment of now, here. I think we can no longer pretend not to see what needs to be seen. Our fears and desires are clarified, so that we can no longer deny what we have perceived and that we have perceived them. Thus, we learn to trust Zazen and see how it underpins everything. The trust is in meditative awareness and its inner compass. There is a moving description from James. Being on my own has turned out to be a wonderful opportunity to retreat and turn inwards. After 60 plus years, it is actually the first time I've spent more than a few days on my own. I've always had worries that on my own I would slip into excessive laziness, despondency, boredom, gratification, on the premise that I do those things anyway, but they're kept in check by a desire to keep up appearances with other people. Yet another tendency I can add to the evidence in judging myself. So I think I have basically organized my life to avoid being on my own for any length of time. Anyway, here I am. As I sit here, I find my palms turning upwards, and the cloud of pain fills my being. In a moment it has moved on, leaving what? It's not bright sunshine after the cloud. In the moment of existence, the cloud was utterly real and all-enveloping. It shone with its own aching brilliance. In the past, if I had to pick a line from the Scripture of Great Wisdom that really resonated with me, it would have been that the skandhas are void, unstained, and pure. I have seen that they are just the 5 skandhas, and I don't have to judge them. But this can become something to cling to. It turns into a thought that I can produce to reassure myself and keep myself from embracing how I actually feel. Can I turn towards the light that is always there and not hide in my own shadow? In the very turning, this question dissolves. There is no form, sensation, thought, or consciousness, no self who is judged or shadow to hide in. I am so profoundly grateful for this human existence. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom. Well, here's another offering, this time from John, who has also been training with the OBC for many, many years. We need to feel the wish to practice or we would never get started. But that can become, very easily in my case, a grasping after something called enlightenment as the answer to all our problems. And practice is the means to get it. If only I can work hard enough, match up to my ideal. I never seem able to fit the image of a really good trainee. And so it must be my own fault that I hadn't found enlightenment after many years of trying and not succeeding. I obviously wasn't working hard enough, didn't want it enough. I was not really sincere. My fear that I was not really up to it was maybe true, was the real me. I hope nobody notices. I spent many years very sincerely barking myself hoarse up the wrong tree, all the while thinking I was doing the right thing, trying to be a proper trainee, and then maybe I would get it. I asked one of the seniors how to keep going, how to get past this apparently insoluble problem. "Is this a koan?" I asked. And he very kindly suggested I drop the image and just return to Zazen and the precepts. What? I was astounded. I'd never seen my efforts at practice in that way before. I had to laugh at all that self-conscious, stiff, solemnly sincere effort. And also to feel like putting my arm around the little self that had tried so hard for so long. Boo-hoo. And the effort wasn't, or isn't, wasted. It did or does demonstrate to me, in a lasting way, that suffering is caused by clinging, even if the object or goal and method seem good and truly worthwhile. I felt as if the rug had been pulled out from under me. I had used the lure of enlightenment as both a carrot and a stick to make myself train. But grasping after it, whatever it was, wasn't the way. Well-intentioned, but a big mistake. So where was the motivation to come from? I was so used to the usual way of seeing something I want, try to get it, and then judge and criticize my efforts doing along the way. Without that way of thinking to act from, how would I get myself to do anything? How would I know what to do? Very gradually it dawns on me that the wish to practice, the Bodhi mind, if you want to call it that, is there and was there from the start. I didn't create it, and my often misguided efforts don't stop it. It was what brought me to seek a genuine, true way to live in the first place. This already here, leading me back to this already here, patiently waiting to be recognized, acknowledged, accepted and embraced, not fought against and resisted. On we all go, every one of us, warts and all, nothing excluded. It occurs to me that everything I have written could be wrong and rather shallow, just a continuing bunch of my misperceptions. Then something from Teresa. At the beginning of Living by Vow, Okumura says ordinary people are those who live being pulled by their karma. Bodhisattvas are those who live by their vows. This really made me think about to what extent I am pulled along by my karmic habits. And it is also helping me to reflect on the person that has been created by these habits. I'd like to think that I'm living by vow and making decisions based on perceptual considerations. But the truth of it is that I know I'm still driven by my karmic tendencies. And a lot of what is driving me is a fear of decline and death. I seem to have a lot of ideas about the karmic tendencies of others and how these are reinforcing unhealthy habits, and not enough insight into my own. I suspect we all share some of that with Teresa. And from Gina. For a long time, the verse below from the scripture of Avalokiteshvara, and the verse is, if bound in chains in prison, let us just think on Kanzeon's great holy power. At once the shackle will then set us free. And although it had been around for a long time, I now began to reflect on what eventually enabled me to act on it. And I believe it came from a place of deepest wisdom, helping me to see that even things like hope, despair, and reasoning can work as avoidance strategies. This verse speaks to me every time I sing it, and it jumped out at me when I read Rav Master Daishin's article on loneliness. It says to me that the things I most want to deny about myself are actually my door to freedom. If I can bring myself to feel the very feelings that I most fear, those I most fear feeling, and stop looking away from that in favor of searching for a strategy, then something changes. I don't feel separate anymore. The striving stops. I feel whole. It doesn't last, but I know how it is, and I know that it is true, and I know what it isn't. It feels as if the shackles themselves are the very key, so I don't have to look outside myself. And I don't know about all of you, but I find these contributions really very inspiring by their openness, ongoing investigation, always going on, and in doing so letting go of thought, resisting the pull of discrimination, and accepting situations as the reality of life. And particularly James and John have been practicing a long, long time, longer than any of us, and that they are so open about the difficulties that are still there. I hope inspires rather than makes us feel it's absolutely hopeless. I might as well give up, because they haven't done, and they see themselves so clearly. Then Alison wrote, Okumura says quite plainly, many people believe in transmigrating from one lifetime to another. I don't believe in this, but I know we transmigrate within this life. And she wondered if I could make any observations about this. Perhaps none of you who get to know me better won't be surprised if I say I don't know. I try not to dismiss doctrine, and at the final count, I have to hold open the possibility that it could be true, without feeling I should pretend that I do believe, when frankly, I simply don't know. Like Okumura, I do see myself at times, for instance, behaving like a hungry ghost, craving satisfaction, or in a very human way, feeling confused and unhappy, overwhelmed by responsibilities, not able to cope, judging others who seem to stand against me, and so on and so on and so on. In that sense, I do see myself transmigrating from one of the 6 realms to another, moment by moment, and probably each day. As you know, Okumura went from Japan in 1975 to start the Valley Zendo in Massachusetts. I want to draw attention to what he wrote on page 182. After 5 years, I had pain in my neck, shoulders, elbows, and knees from the hard physical labor. I couldn't work, and sitting sesshin was very difficult. I had no health insurance or money for medical treatment, so I had to return to Japan. And there he saw that his practice had not been for the sake of Buddha Dharma, but for his own self-satisfaction. He knew he couldn't continue to practice with this attitude, nor could he stop practicing and go back to an ordinary life. And he was stuck in that situation for some time. And this is when he was in Japan, staying at his sibling's flat, I think it was his son's. One day something made me sit on a cushion. I had no desire, no reason, no need to sit, but found myself sitting at my brother's apartment by myself. It was very peaceful. I didn't sit because of the Buddha's teaching. I didn't need a reason to sit. I just sat. There was no need to compete with others or with myself. Thereafter, I didn't need to sit as often as I had before. I could just sit as much as my physical condition allowed. I felt free to be myself and nothing more. I am still a deluded, ordinary human being with ignorance and desires. But when I sat and let go of thoughts, I was, or more precisely my Zazen was, free of ignorance and selfish desires. And I don't know if any of us sometimes know that when we're sitting. We're not doing it because we're expected to. We're not doing it because we think others will think, oh, why is room so-and-so not there? So we go and sit. I think it is very important to really delve into that. And then it was after this that he returned to America and is now abbot of Transience Zen Temple in Bloomington, Indiana. And it was very early on in the series of talks that what Okumura writes about was echoed by something Stuart sent me recently in his pondering on the Heart Sutra and his reactions to the monastery being closed at a time when, instead of coming and leaving abruptly, which he's done many, many times in the past, he finds himself ready to commit to coming and staying the course. I just thought how ironic the universe is as it blocks our desires. Here's what Stuart experienced. I sometimes just find myself straightening my trousers, sitting on my big cushion with no particular memory of deciding to. It just sort of gets done. Recently, someone contacted me, despairing and doubting their practice, and feeling they'd given up after many years of practice. They'd stopped visiting the nearest temple, stopped going to group meetings, stopped meditating. They were exhausted by all life had put in front of them. and they felt they had to carry an anxiety for the family. And this was a large part of the exhaustion. And I think we can very easily get into feeling that we do have to carry more than we are able to. So how do we learn to embrace suffering without being overwhelmed? Where do we find the inner balance and the courage to remain present when we wish to flee? To at least take what perhaps feels like a rest from being compassionate. I think it helps to forgive our wish to disconnect and to honor our human frailty. The more we understand what compassion is, the more it becomes a journey towards wisdom. Wisdom reminds us that our longing that our loved one should not be touched by unhappiness and impermanence can so easily turn into the near enemy of compassion, which is attachment to results and insistence that life should be other than it is. And beginning to see through wisdom what compassion really is, then it helps us to bear what at first sight might feel unbearable. And in the case of the person who contacted me, to see a loved one suffer, to imagine they are suffering. Actually, often we think they are suffering more than they actually are. Compassion isn't magic. It cannot dispel all suffering. Beware of letting compassion become idealistic. Actually, it's not. It's altruistic. That's to say, a selfless concern for the well-being of others, for all others. We aren't asked to lay down our life for others, or find a solution for the struggles of the world, or immediately rescue all beings. Like Avalokiteshvara, we awaken to the emptiness of the five skandhas, and thus are able to hear the cries of the world, discovering the heart that trembles in the face of suffering, and yet is not disheartened, but continues to open in spite of being aware that the more the heart opens, the more suffering there is to be seen. Awareness also teaches us to read between the lines and see through the world of appearances. We readily sense the loneliness, need, fear that others feel. It's almost as if we hear the fragility of another's heartbeat. And certainly the person who was in touch with me had resonated with what Okumura wrote. And when I found myself unable to continue with that practice, I was perplexed and depressed. I didn't know what to do. Yet somehow, this person failed to read on to the next paragraph, where Okumura describes finding him sitting on the cushion, which I have talked you through. And this is not unusual for all of us not to pay attention to the very Dharma that we need, that's there, freely offered to us. However, never despair, because the Buddhas and ancestors are remarkably patient and never give up on us. We are all offered a second chance, then a third chance, and then as many chances as we personally need to get back on track. Notice from this example how when we are despairing, our attention wavers. We're tempted to give up without realizing what we have missed. Our attention somehow becomes strangled by negative emotions, by despair and hopelessness, so that we can't see further than the deep pit of wanting to give up. Then something in us reaches out to another. There is great trust in this. We can rely on each other as spiritual friends. And just to say to those who aren't here, if you still have questions and comments, do contact me. You're free to do that directly rather than through GD. And here to end with is a circling back to the first talk, with a comment by Alison relating to the use of the word pure rather than empty in our singing of the scripture of great wisdom each morning. For myself, I've always felt slightly ill at ease using the word pure. I think because for me it can have connotations of superiority or elitism, which I know is absolutely not the intention behind using it in the scripture of great wisdom. Conversely, the word empty has not a particularly negative feel for me. It all makes me realize that how we interpret language is governed by many influences and what we bring to our reading. So this neatly brings me back to what I've repeatedly pointed to in these talks. We are all very different, and we all have to discover what we need to do. So let us end with, O Buddha, going on beyond, always going on beyond, always becoming Buddha. Hail, hail, hail.